Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and our guest today is Vicki Moore. She is joining us from Frankfurt, Germany. She's an entrepreneur, author, and coach. Her passion is finding ways to help people achieve big goals. So she spent most of her career in corporate training and development, working with Fortune 500 clients. And then after founding a successful training agency in Los Angeles that she ran for 10 years, she then pursued her dream of moving to Europe in 2015. So again, she now lives in Germany. She works with teams and individuals to help them confidently create their own path to success. So before I tell you a little bit more about Vicki, first off, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm great, thanks. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I want to give a shout out and a thanks to Lynn Yap, who was my guest in episode 117, because she introduced us and recommended Vicki as a guest. So thanks to Lynn for doing that. Vicki is the author of a book titled Life Beyond Should, Overcoming Expectations and Create the Life You Want, that was released in May 2021. So you can learn more about the book and Vicki's work at lifebeyondshould.com. And we're going to be doing a book giveaway contest related to the episode here. So look for a link, a form you can fill out on the show episode page. Look for a link for that in the show notes. So Vicki, as we normally do, we're going to have an opportunity to talk about your work these days and your book and other experiences, but we like to dive right in and ask the question we always ask here. What would you say is your favorite mistake?
Well, my favorite mistake, and also the one that had the biggest impact on my life, was in 2011 when I gave away the business that I had spent 10 years building in Los Angeles.
So what do you mean? So tell us more about that. What do you mean gave away? Was that?
Well, yeah. So let me start. Let me start at the beginning of the story. I started, early in my career in Los Angeles. I worked in a variety of corporate roles, but after a few years, I decided to branch out on my own as an independent consultant. And as I got more and more clients, I added team members to help me manage larger projects. And so before I knew it, I had a small training agency helping corporate clients deliver training and coaching programs across the US. And the business continued to grow, adding more team members. Even through 2008, during the recession, we actually managed to double our revenues in 2008. So everything was going really well until 2011, when my personal life got in the way of the business in a way that sort of threatened the existence of the business. A divorce meant that the business was likely going to be part of financial and legal negotiations that could go on for years. You know how that goes. And the more I thought about it and the more I considered the options, I was like, I don't want to put the team through that. We had a really, close-knit team, worked really well together. And I didn't want to jeopardize the client work. And I thought, okay, years of battling over negotiations just didn't make a lot of sense. And so I talked to one of my colleagues at the time about it, and we talked through the different options. And ultimately, we decided that I would hand the business over to her to run under a new business name. And I essentially resigned from my own business and went back to being an employee for a competitor.
And so how did that end up working out, though? Because I can understand, sounds like the reasoning behind that, not speaking as an attorney or certainly I'm not a divorce lawyer here, but why do you look back and say that was a mistake? What aspect of that decision to give away the business?
Well, ultimately it did work out for the team. It had the desired result in that the team continued to work together. They're still working together. The business is thriving even now. It was a mistake, or it felt like a mistake at the time for me, because I had put so much energy into creating a business that really supported my lifestyle. Like I had finally gotten to the point where I had a flexible work schedule. I had work that I loved. I had systems in place that helped the business to run even when I wasn't there. And so the effort was really put into creating something that supported my life and supported good work that I enjoyed. And to give that up felt like a huge step backwards, especially to going back to being an employee, going from an entrepreneur to then, suddenly being an employee again. I gave up a lot of freedom at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
So you were saying it felt like a mistake at the time, or you had some regrets about that. Did you come to view that decision differently as time elapsed, or how do you view it looking back now, a decade later?
Yeah, so looking back now, I see that it actually created the space and the opportunity for something new for me. It created the freedom for me to actually pursue my dream of eventually living in Europe. And obviously, if I was running a business, that certainly wouldn't have been as easy to do. It may not have been possible to do. So the space that it opened up in my life to change direction ultimately had a much more positive effect for me than staying there and continuing to run the business.
Yeah. So it sounds like if you had a time machine, knowing what you know now, you would make the same decision at the time, but maybe you would have felt less bad about it in the short term and in immediately after making that decision. Is that fair to say?
I would have made the same decision because it felt like the right thing to do. I mean, even at the time,
right.
Even at the time, it was hard to do, but it felt like the right thing to do for the business and for the team. I guess the only thing that I regret, if I had a time machine that would allow me to see all the possible paths that one could take, I feel like there might have been a way for me to continue to be involved in the business and maintain that connection and that work. So that's the only thing I might have done differently, is just seek more types of options.
Sure. And I guess one of the questions, just looking back, and this is just getting into the weeds, I'm just curious. Well, I'm sure you had an attorney who helped you talk through and think through this idea of giving away the business. That didn't cause any repercussions. I mean, I imagine it would be bad if, like, during that time where you're thinking about having to split up assets, like if you'd just written a check for $100,000 out of your 401k, that your then husband and their attorneys might have said, "Hey, you can't be giving this away because it's partially his."
Well, it was it was. If I kept the business, the valuation of the business would have been the thing that took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Really establishing the value of the business is what it's worth, and if I want to buy it out, how much would it cost to buy it out? And that was what concerned me, was how much time it would take to establish that, and would a buyout even be possible? Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, I mean, this wasn't the kind of business that was going to go, for an IPO, right? It wasn't. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like I was giving away a multi-million-dollar scalable enterprise. It was a small mm-hmm. agency, and it felt like sort of I was the business and I was the brand, so it wasn't really a saleable business in that sense. So from the legal perspective, it was more about how long do we have to sort out what the negotiations are, more than the actual financial aspect of it.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing, that story and for talking about it. And, I'm curious just, to move forward now, how is it living the dream in Europe? How has that panned out for you? I hope well.
Well, it's the dream is good in a lot of ways, but actually one thing that goes back to giving away the business, and one reason, the mistake part still comes into play, as I had thought that when I moved to Europe, I could do the same thing. I was like, okay, I've done it once, I can do it again. I can build a business. I'll start offering corporate training and consulting solutions. And I hadn't really factored in cultural differences,
Mm.
business culture differences, the importance of network, the importance of language. And so my dream of sort of, I'm just going to take the same formula and plop it
Mm.
down in Europe and make it work, didn't really work out. But I have to say what I've been able to experience working and living in Europe has been fabulous. It's certainly been learning after learning and lesson after lesson,
Mhm.
no shortage of opportunities to acquire new skills and learn new things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, was the dream specifically always Germany, or did you consider different countries within Europe?
I I was aiming for Spain.
Yeah.
I missed.
Yeah, at
I,
the least.
by a couple of borders, I missed. No, the dream was Spain, to be somewhere warm and sunny, Mediterranean climate. But when I moved to Europe, it's actually an interesting connection. The agency that I went to work for in the US after I gave away the business ended up being the one that sponsored my visa to move to Europe. So the connection ended up being a really, valuable thing for me instead of a mistake. It ended up being really helpful. But their requirement to sponsor the visa was that, oh, well, the work is in Germany, so that's where you need to be.
Are you? I'm curious. I mean, is this intended to be a permanent, forever move? Like you're pursuing citizenship, where it would maybe make it easier to move within the EU?
So I have residence in the EU now, so
Mhm.
I am able to move around in the EU. And yes, that was one of the goals, was to be able to have that freedom of movement, because really the dream was more related to being able to travel easily, learn languages, learn more about different places, less like a tourist and more like a local. That
Mhm.
was really the experience that I wanted to have. And certainly living and working here has made that come true. And
Mhm.
it's worth everything that it took to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing, also some of the reflection of, being there in Germany and learning from mistakes along the way. It sounds like you've taken a pretty positive view of building upon not letting, building upon lessons learned, not letting setbacks derail you from what it is that you're hoping to build and achieve there in Europe, right?
Yeah, somebody said the other day, it's only a failure when you stop trying. So I'm hanging
Yeah,
on to that saying. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You're either still working at it or you've given up. I've said a very similar thing before, that there are only sort of two states of being for whether it's a business or a project or an initiative within a company. Yeah, it fails once you've decided to stop. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
persistence
exactly.
and learning from setbacks. That's certainly one of the themes that we talk about here on the podcast. Is that something that you end up trying to coach others through? Kind of dealing with setbacks or mistakes and helping people work through that. Tell us more about the coaching work that you do with people that way.
Yeah, so certainly dealing with setbacks and what people consider mistakes is part of the coaching, but it starts before that, because what I found, and even in my own experience moving to Europe, what I found is really the first thing that people need help with is overcoming expectations, either of other people or of themselves. And my story of making the decision about the business and then making the decision to move to Europe, so many people thought I had lost my mind. Right? You're giving up a successful business, you're giving up a successful career. Why would you start all over again? You don't know anybody there, you don't have a job. And those expectations that everybody else has of what our life should look like,
Mm.
it makes it really difficult for a lot of people at least, makes it difficult to pursue those big sort of unconventional goals. And so that's the first thing I've coached people on, is what are the expectations that they're living up to and whose expectations are they?
So it sounds like, going back to that decision and story you told us about, you said at the time it felt like the right decision, but others were putting pressure on you or giving you sort of like this negative feedback of, hey, Vicki, you're making a mistake. That's tough to fight through, I bet.
Yeah, well, it's really hard, and especially at the time, because of course that's such an emotional thing. Yeah, everything in my life was changing all at the same time.
Yeah.
And of course, people are giving advice and trying to be helpful. But yeah, I got so much advice. No, you should fight. You need to, get a better lawyer and do that. And my own perspective was getting sort of pushed down from people that, from their own experience knew better. But that was from their experience, not from my experience.
Right. Right. I mean, who knows your own life better than you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think ultimately you have to make the decision that feels right for you, and, then pursue the version of success that is your version of success. And so whether it's in business or career or, personal life, what I define as success and what somebody else defines as success are two different things. And you need to pursue the one that's important to you, not the one that other people think, should be the goal.
So another question for you, Vicki, about the coaching and the work that you do now. Who do you work with, and what type of coaching? Is it related to training and development, or broader personal or leadership coaching?
Well, it comes out of my experience in training and development, which, you've just heard the story, has been basically my entire career. Because, the core of training and development and employee development is, empowerment to use your talents and skills to grow and change and achieve goals. And so I've taken what I've gained from my experience in corporate training and development and applied it to individual situations. So I coach individuals, primarily women, and people that have a sort of unconventional goals. I like to call them impractical or impossible goals, right? Because those are the ones that sort of require that change in mindset, right? It's not just about, I need to do these 5 things in this order. First, it's about changing the mindset that even though it feels impractical or impossible, there's actually a way to accomplish it. And then it's just a matter of finding out what are the options, how to reach that goal.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is, like with any good coaching, it's not about you as the coach telling them what to do. Back to the idea of the people you're coaching, they know their life and their goals and their dreams more than you ever could. So you're helping them think through those possibilities and figure out their own path.
Exactly. To think through those possibilities, or to see possibilities that they might not be seeing yet. And this is with the business as well. There probably were other options that I had available to me at the time that I just wasn't seeing. Right. Yeah. And sometimes you need people to challenge the perspective to help see a different perspective or another option or another path. And so it's first about opening up the range of possibilities, and then helping people decide based on their own values and their goals, which of those possibilities is best for them. Yeah. And
you work with, you've got clients mainly in the EU. Do you still work with clients in the US, given virtual meetings, even with the time zones? That probably opens up a different world of clients to you, or?
Yes. Yeah. So I have clients both in the US and in the EU. The language makes a difference. So I actually have more clients in the US than in the EU, because people prefer, coaching is so personal and individual that people prefer generally to be coached in their native language. I am not fluent in multiple European languages, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. But yes, both in the EU and in the US. Certainly that's been broadened, over the past couple of years. People have gotten more comfortable with video conferencing and coaching virtually.
Yeah. And before we talk about the book, just a question, curiosity about moving to Germany. Sometimes I like to ask people a question of like, well, what's the best thing about this, and what's the worst thing about it, or the biggest challenge? I mean, you've touched on this a little bit already, I think. But how would you summarize? Like, what's the best thing about moving to Germany for you?
The best thing about moving to Germany for me is the just incredible variety of experiences and people and perspectives that I've been fortunate enough to have while I'm here. Conversations with people from, all different countries and different backgrounds, and even business conversations sitting around a conference room table when we used to be able to do that. And hearing somebody else's perspective on a problem because they're coming from a completely different experience than what I have. And that's just opened up possibilities that I can't even begin to describe.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned language, but so maybe that's the answer to the biggest challenge. What's the biggest challenge about just picking up and moving to a new country?
No, language was not the biggest challenge. Yeah. It's certainly a challenge. But the biggest challenge was, and I remember it very specifically when I first moved here, I was starting over again as if I was 5 years old. I didn't know where to buy groceries. I didn't know how to get electricity. I didn't know how to get internet. I couldn't read my mail. I couldn't read the labels on the groceries once I found the grocery store. So language certainly is part of that, but even the brands are all different. So even when you can read, you still don't know what you're buying. And so it was just this feeling of, here I am, a completely, competent, experienced, professional woman who was in charge of my life and running a business, plopped down in this country where they're going to turn off my electricity because I can't read my mail. And that was just hard.
I mean, I think, people often misuse the word humbling. That sounds like that would be truly a humbling experience to start having to relearn everything and being so uncomfortable.
It was really humbling. It was so frustrating. I tried everything. I actually looked for a coach. I told someone, I said, I would pay top dollar for someone just to help me get through daily life. How do I do this? But it was also a really powerful learning experience, because to be in that situation, I just had to get comfortable saying, I don't know. And that was really hard for me at first. And then finally, I realized that there was a lot of power in saying, I don't know, because I could learn so much.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a challenge for leaders, even when it's not a change in country or a change in language. Getting comfortable with being the manager, being the CEO, being the founder, what have you. And to your point, being comfortable with saying, I don't know. Sometimes there's a mistake where people will pretend that they know things, even, because, the expectations maybe are that they do have all the answers. And that might be an example of unfair expectations that people need to overcome, sort of thinking back to the subtitle of your book.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting connection. And I recently was talking to someone about the change for leadership now. And I think the expectations of leadership have changed, because it used to be that a powerful or a strong leader was expected to have all the answers.
Yeah.
And now there is a shift to a leader is expected to encourage collaboration and participation, but that's a hard adjustment for people, certainly. Yeah. And that shift in expectations and getting comfortable with the change in expectations. Yeah, and the book touches on that as well, about the importance of expectations, right? Because we need expectations. They help us get through life. If you didn't know what to expect, everything you did, just like my move to Germany, everything you do would be hard because it would be new every time. So the expectations create this, I know how to handle the situation, I know what to do. But at the same time, we need to challenge expectations when they stop working for us. And that's the subtle difference.
Yeah. So our guest again is Vicki Moore, and the title of her book is Life Beyond Should: Overcome Expectations and Create the Life You Want. I was going to ask you about this. You've touched on already some of the nuance in expectations, because I think of, like, in a lot of cases, expectations can be a good thing. If people, if you have a good reputation and people have high expectations of you as a speaker or as a podcast host, or, I mean, that can be good, but then maybe it tips into being a problem if people have unfair expectations. Like, I'm never going to be perfect, so if somebody expects me to give a speech without stumbling over a word, and I don't know if that's how you would define perfection, somebody might, unfair expectations, or what you think are unfair expectations, could cause a lot of stress. Is that part of what an individual might need to overcome?
That is part of it. Is not even unfair expectations can cause stress because people are expecting something unrealistic. And then you're trying to live up to that. And you see this a lot with college age students related to their parents' expectations, and this syndrome where, students burn out before they've ever gone to work because they're trying to live up to expectations of, being on the football team and getting good grades and doing community service and whatever. So you see that in situations like that. But there's also the expectation bias where it tends to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, where we do step into the expectations of us, which, when they're positive expectations, can be good. If your boss expects you to give a perfect presentation, you're more likely to give a perfect presentation just because of that. At the same time, if your boss expects that you're not capable of making that client pitch, then you're less likely to succeed because already the expectation has been set that you're not going to succeed. And they did research with students where teachers' expectations actually predicted the result of the student, right? The students stepped into the expectation people had of them. And that's a dangerous thing. And that's, it's a bias that, once you're aware of it, can be overcome.
Yeah, and for example, racism or bias in that way could affect somebody's expectations in a way that sets the bar low for somebody, instead of believing in somebody and having more of an expectation of success regardless of their race or their background or some other factor. Is that type of thing?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. So whether expectations are low or high, we tend to live up or down to them, if we accept them as true. And that's the important factor. So, a lot of the coaching I do is, whose expectation is it? And is it from your individual perspective, is that expectation true? And if it's not, what do you do differently to move past it? So that is the beyond should part of the book, is what everybody else thinks you should do or should be, and how to identify that, and then how to set your own goals and expectations for what you want.
Yeah. I think that's a really helpful framework. I like those questions and that thought process of, for one, figuring out whose expectation is it? Is it expectation that comes from a manager, a client, a customer? Is it an expectation that you're putting on yourself? Sometimes those things can be out of sync. I mean, speaking for myself a little bit, as somebody who is still trying to be a recovering perfectionist, like, if you think the expectations are too high, perfectionism leads to procrastination. If you think, well, the way I can make sure it's not seen as imperfect is by not completing it. Do you see that dynamic, or help coach I'm not asking you to, I'm not trying to get a free coaching session from you, but is that something you seem like you kind of recognize that, that scenario?
Well, I recognize that scenario personally because I am also
Okay.
a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually writing the book was one of the hardest lessons in not being a perfectionist that I have ever had, because I mean, you could keep editing and keep editing and keep editing for, for decades. And finally, the publisher said, you just have to submit it already.
Right.
But yeah, from a coaching perspective as well. I mean, obviously there are lots of different forms of procrastination for something for a challenge that we're afraid we might not succeed at. Mm-hmm. So whether it's perfectionism or whether it's, other types of procrastination, that's one of the sort of habits that I coach, that I help people to recognize and then develop new habits to replace that.
Yeah. That's, I mean, there are pros and cons of having a third-party publisher or doing it yourself. One advantage for some people is, like you said, the deadline and the pressure, the follow-up to get it in. But yeah, there's that perfectionism of, is it good enough to release yet? Sometimes, the ideas bouncing around in your own head can prevent a perfectionist from even starting to type. And at least for me, one of the tips I got was, like, don't try to write a perfect first draft. Like at some point, you got to just get the fingers moving and write it, and then you can edit it. Then you can get input from others. Then you can craft it and make it at least good enough to release.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. And I heard that a couple of times, was just get it out of your head and onto paper, regardless of how bad it is, and then work on it later. But, you make a really good point. I mean, we're talking about writing a book, but I think that applies to, anything, whether it's in business or, changing careers or, pursuing any other sort of big goal. Sometimes, well, not even sometimes, often the hardest part is starting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that, whatever it is, take the first step, whether that's get it out of your head onto paper or do the research or make an appointment or whatever. But taking that first step, once you have that forward momentum, then the next step and the next step and the next step are easier.
Yeah. I think it's really well said. So I think we'll wrap up on that note. Vicki, thank you for sharing, some of your story and your reflections, and I think some really good advice and frameworks for others. So again, I'll encourage people to go check out the book, Life Beyond Should: Overcoming Expectations and Create the Life You Want, by Vicki Moore. The website is lifebeyondshould.com. And again, go and enter the contest for the book giveaway. And I hope people will go and check that out and find it helpful to them, whether they win a copy or better yet, go buy a copy. So Vicki, thank you. Thank you for being a guest today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed the conversation.